Hello everyone and welcome back to another review. Fair warning, this is not going to be a positive review. It may in fact actually turn into a serious rant if I lose control. You have been warned. So for those of you who saw my January wrap-up, you know that I talked about my reading habits and how on February 1st I finished 2 books, both of which were actually fairy tale adaptations. But the book in question I'm going to be reviewing, and the first of the 2 fairy tale retellings I read, was Cruel Beauty by Rosamond Hodge. This is Ms. Hodge's debut novel, and it is a reinterpretation of the Beauty and the Beast myth, the classic French fairy tale, also known as La Belle et la Bête. In this case, Ms. Hodge takes the Beauty and the Beast fairy tale and spins it with what was claimed to be a Greek mythological perspective. I say claimed because that was one of my biggest problems with the book. There are actually a lot of problems I had with this book, and what's unfortunate is that these problems completely obliterate just about anything that was potentially good about this story. The first thing I'm really going to talk about, because it was perhaps the biggest problem with the story, is the world building. Obviously, anytime you put a mythological or fantastical perspective on your story, you have to build your world, and you have to make sure it is rock solid. Ms. Hodge's world is not rock solid. In fact, it's a hot mess. It's a jumble of too many different ideals and potential story themes that don't really mesh, never really go anywhere, and just result in, as I said, a hot mess. Let's do some reading, shall we? Long ago, the island of Arcadia was only a minor province in the Empire of Romano-Graecia. It was a half-wild land populated only by imperial garrisons and a rude, unlettered people who hid in thickets to worship their old, uncivilized gods and refused to call their land anything except Anglia. Arcadia, for those of you who don't know, is a province in the Peloponnese, which is a peninsula that is a part of Greece. It is not an island. Arcadia is in no way an island. It's near Lacedaemon, which, for those of you who don't know, you're talking Sparta and that area of Greece. So like I said, is not an island. There is no island called Arcadia in Greece. And I'm sure some people are familiar with the term Arcadia and Arcadians just from the film 300. They were the other Greeks who showed up with the Spartans. I mean, they weren't nearly as attractive as Jerry Butler and those others running around in red tights. Sorry, got distracted. But when the empire fell to barbarians, when the Athena Parthenos was smashed and the 7 hills burnt, Arcadia alone remained unravaged. So I don't understand exactly where this is supposed to be in Greece, but it's not actually Greece. What I also object to is the idea that you have Rome and Greece both as single countries. There's a problem with that historically. Greece, in terms of the ancient times and the way that Ms. Hodge is painting it, was never really a unified country. It was a slew and hodgepodge of city-states that were always fighting for control, making alliances, breaking alliances, fighting each other for dominance. It was never really a unified country, which is extremely unfortunate, and also is part of the reason why people like Alexander and then the Romans were able to conquer Greece in the way that they were. The idea that you'd have Romana Graecia is kind of impossible historically. And I'm sure you're saying, but this is a kind of fantasy world, this is mythological. Yes, but if you're going to pull from mythology and you're clearly setting this in what is supposed to be a real place, you can't just throw around terms and expect people to roll with it. Some say that Hermes even granted him the power to command demons. If so, then Claudius was truly the most powerful king that ever lived. Demons, those scraps of idiot malice begotten in the depths of Tartarus, are as old as the gods, and a few have always escaped their prison to crawl through the shadows of our world. No one but the gods can stop them, and no one at all can reason with them. For any mortal who sees them goes mad, and demons only desire to feast on human fear. Demons, as we know them and as they are implied to be within Cruel Beauty, are a Judeo-Christian ideal. In the Greek mythology, there were such things as demons, D-A-E-M-O-N-S, which is the etymological root of demon as we know it as a word. Demons of Greek mythology were benevolent nature spirits. They were in no way malignant, malicious, or cruel. They were not coming from the depths of Tartarus, which, by the way, was the deepest and darkest part of the underworld from which nothing escaped. You were flung into this pit You were tortured by the Erinyes, also known as the Furies, and you were given the cruelest and most horrible of punishments. There was no escaping Tartarus. Ever. Sure, I'll be willing to bend that for, story's sake. Something escaped Tartarus. But things getting out all the time? No, it just doesn't happen. Not mythologically, not with the precedent that was set in Greek myth about what Tartarus was and what it could do. That was all on pages 13 to 14 of the stories. This is the introduction. As you noted from all the little notes I was putting in here, this is already a hot mess. In a lot of cases, blendings of mythologies wouldn't bother me too much. Now, yes, I am extremely partial to Greek mythology because it is so important to me personally. On both sides of my family, Greek mythology holds a special weight. On my dad's side, I am actually of Greek lineage. I have a yaya, she's 100% Greek, 100% Spartan. And then on my mom's side, her dad is Italian, but he's a now retired professor of the classics. This was his life. This is what he did. So, Greek mythology is one point I can often be a stickler. And this is where I really want to point something out. The idea of a Romana Graecia, or Graecia, however you want to pronounce it, of Rome and Greece teaming up. It doesn't really work mythologically. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, well, it's called Greco-Roman mythology. Yes, it is, but there are notable differences between the Greek mythology and the Roman mythology. The Romans had a mythology before they came into contact with the Greeks, before they conquered Greece, before they adopted, blended, melded with a lot of the Greek pantheon. They had their own mythology, and the Roman gods are not the Greek gods. Let me give an example. Both the Roman and the Greek mythologies and their pantheons have a male war god. The Greeks have Ares, the Romans have Mars. For the Greeks, Ares represents that mindless, bloodthirsty, chaotic aspect of warfare. He keeps as his company chaos, discord, fear, and he's not exactly the nicest people. He's in no way noble or honorable. In fact, of the Olympians, he commands perhaps the least respect amongst themselves. The ancient Greeks would have absolutely feared Ares, and they would have shown him due respect, but in comparison to the other gods, he's not exactly high on the totem pole. Now compare that to Mars and the Romans. Mars represents the militaristic side of war. He's the planning. He's the military, the organization, the precision, and he is extremely respected, not only amongst the Roman pantheon, but amongst the Roman people. In fact, in their creation myth with Romulus and Remus, Mars is their mythological father. Mars, that military war god, is essentially the father of the founders of Rome. What does this tell you about how much he was respected and valued? So yes, as you can see, Greek and Roman mythology, not the same thing at all. You're talking hundreds of years between the development of one and the development of the other. Of course they're not going to be the same. This is why I particularly object to Ms. Hodge's idea of them being the same thing, of them being able to create this one unified state where, yes, they all clearly are worshipping the same gods. They're not. It just feels, frankly, a bit lazy, like there wasn't enough research done, or if she just didn't feel like trying to create a distinction. And again, I go back to the idea of demons. If you want to tell a story with the Judeo-Christian ideal of demons, just stick to that mythology. Frankly, you don't need to bring in the rest of Greek mythology. I think this is perhaps where I come into another aspect of the world building that doesn't really work. And that is that there is just too much with not enough. What do I mean by this? The story of Beauty and the Beast is a really simple tale. There's not much to it. There are plenty of themes you can expound upon, such as questions of identity, sight versus insight, physical versus inner beauty, Stockholm Syndrome if you really want to go there, bestiality. I mean, there's lots of things you can do with this. But it's nothing particularly complicated or complex, really. It's a simple story. Ms. Hodge essentially tries to tell the story of Beauty and the Beast along with Hades and Persephone, along with Orpheus and Eurydice, along with Pandora's box, and it's just too much. It's too many very different, albeit at times similar storylines that don't blend well together, and it's extremely disappointing. Miss Hodge doesn't really bring enough to the table in terms of her own creativity to make them mesh beautifully. Now yes, there are some elements of this that are very creative, and she does some things that are very good. But what it really boils down to is that Miss Hodge seems to just sort of name drop gods and characters. She doesn't really expound, she doesn't explain why this is particularly relevant, she just name drops. And that is not good storytelling. Because what happens with all this name dropping is that you have a first third which is crammed full of random information, random stories, random references, and they don't really go anywhere. That Judeo-Christian idea of demons and the way that sort of shadow world works is what ends up taking up the entire last third. And that is extremely frustrating. I wish she had simply stuck to that and not brought the Greek mythology in, because it wasn't needed, and all it did was distract from what could have been a very smooth, very consistent story. The last thing I'm going to harp upon in the story is the insta-love. I wasn't really prepared for any of it, because this is the story of Beauty and the Beast. This is about love growing over time, albeit under capture and duress, but over time. This is an insta-love triangle. The main character, Nyx, falls immediately in love with two different people who are in this house. There's the gentle lord to whom she has been married and who represents the beast of the story, and another character named Shade. Yes, she falls for Shade first, and not just like, oh, I think you're hot kind of falls for, but a I will literally die for you falls for. This is pretty much right after meeting the guy. What the hell? That actually brings me to the discussion of the characters. These were some of the most unlikable characters I have ever come across in fiction. I've said before that I don't mind characters who I can dislike, but they at least have to be interesting. Nyx and her entire family were just despicable, unlikable people. I frankly didn't care about any of them. I wished they had all died. I actually wished they had all died. The Gentle Lord and Shade as characters are extremely one-dimensional. There's not much to them. Their storyline near the end gets a little better, but even then, there's nothing afterward. After your big sort of climax, not interesting anymore. It's such a disappointment in a book from which I'd heard good things and for which I was really prepared to like, because it had the potential to be good, and it wasn't. But that's all from me today, you guys, so until next time, cheers.